but we only scratch the surface of the meaning of the book.
You state that one of the purposes of prophecy is to encourage people. Let me ask you, how does prophecy do that? And why don't we see more pastors doing it today?
Well, it's a very good question, because I've had pastors tell me that they stay away from prophecy. And yet when you see how the Lord Jesus himself and the apostles, they blended prophetic themes in with their various teachings, because the way in which we live well in this world, the way I think our sanctification proceeds along nicely, is when we have a two-world view. A two-world view is living in this world with an eye on the world to come. I mean, that basically was Paul's philosophy in Philippians 3. And when people don't have that, I mean, if this world is all they have, we see today incredible despair, hopelessness, the upswing in suicides. If this is it, then this is a major disappointment. But prophecy tells us otherwise. It gives us hope. It gives us the ability to make decisions differently, prioritize life differently. Prophecy is very, very critical to, I think, the Christian life today. I tell my students.
Go ahead.
I'll just say, I'll finish. I tell my students that prophecy was written primarily to change the way we live today, not to satisfy our curiosities about future events.
Yeah, my comment was, I find that the pastors that don't deal with prophecy do so for three major reasons. One, they don't think it's important. Two, they think it's too divisive. And three, they don't even have a position themselves. So it seems to me that those are they're not good reasons, but there are the reasons that I hear.
Yep. Yeah, well, I think that I hear the same kinds of things, and it's unfortunate because the scriptures themselves testify to the importance of biblical prophecy.
Yeah, chapter 1 focuses on the importance of a literal hermeneutic. At DTS, which three of us are graduates from, it had a focus on the literal, grammatical, historical, contextual hermeneutic. And in fact, it was drilled into our heads.
Oh, yeah.
Why is holding a proper hermeneutic so important to the interpretation of prophecy?
Well, simply because the scriptures become the final authority. Once you begin to drift into the area of spiritualization or allegorization, where you see that the literal interpretation is not telling you the deep story, when you allegorize, the interpreter becomes the final authority. Literal interpretation, the Bible is the final authority. Mm-hmm. And there is a huge difference between those two approaches as a result.
Yeah, you get two different approaches, and oftentimes you explain it with the analogy of, hey, you have two different airplanes. They're in the same airport. They're right next to each other. You get on one, it might be going to Los Angeles. The other one might be going to Virginia, where I live, or New York, right? Two different places, and you got to decide which one you go on. Chapter 2, you talk about the Abrahamic covenant. You state that it's a foundation to a proper understanding of biblical prophecy, and it begins with the covenants. So can you give an explanation of the Abrahamic covenant, and then also how the future covenants kind of relate back into the Abrahamic covenant? Can you give a little overview on that?
We'll try. That's I tell my students that
that's a big one.
The Abrahamic covenant is the glue that holds the Bible together. So what you're asking me to do now is to tell the whole Bible story. Well, we'll give it a shot.
Well, you compared it to a puzzle, and the outline of the puzzle.
The puzzle. Yes.
Well, the Abrahamic covenant is God's on oath commitment to restore everything that was lost in Eden, and he chose to use Abraham. We don't have any real understanding why he chose Abraham. I have a friend who thinks that God should have chosen the Italians, which I don't think was a great idea. But anyway, God decided.
Exactly.
God decided to use Abraham, and and then as the time went on, he developed promises to the nation of Israel through Isaac and Jacob, a land area, a king, and eventually a covenant which would bring about the salvation of mankind, the new covenant. When you fast forward to the time of Christ, aside from the promises given to Abraham personally and also to David personally, this covenant has not been fulfilled. Nothing has been fulfilled. And so it was going to be in the Lord Jesus. And the nation of Israel chose to reject everything that he presented. But God did not set aside Israel. He condemned that generation of Israel. But God made a promise to Israel, and he is going to fulfill those promises. And so why do we believe in a messianic age, a millennial kingdom, as we call it? For one reason only, and that is the promises that God made are not fulfilled yet. So the Abrahamic covenant, starting with Genesis 12 all the way through Revelation 22, you see the theme of the Abrahamic covenant everywhere. So that is the covenant that forms the framework for biblical prophecy. So I don't know if you have any follow-up points on that, but that really is just the big picture. But what God is doing in the story using Israel, he has set about, instead of, you think about back in Genesis 3, God could have destroyed everything and started over again. What would he have lost? 2 people, 7 days work. But you incinerate it all, and 7 days later you can be up and running with, Fred and Martha instead of Adam and Eve. So he didn't do that. He decided to restore and reconcile everything that was lost. And he chose finally to do it through Abraham. And of course, then through Abraham's great son, the Lord Jesus himself. Yeah. And so that's where we're headed.